Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're so happy to have you here. My name is Denise Augusto. I'm a professor in the College of Computing and Informatics at Drexel University, although actually I'm at home today, as are all of us here at Drexel. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. It's the third in our series on the hiring outlook for information professionals. Our first two webinars focused on the job market, the current job market, particularly in the COVID-19 environment, with ideas for job hunting and how to find jobs in information services. And if you're interested in either of those webinars, the recordings are available on the College of Computing and Informatics website for anyone to review. But today we want to focus on volunteering as a way to help community and as a way to get involved and to enter the broad fields of information services. Very excited about today's volunteer speakers and so grateful to them for giving us their time. We have four speakers for you today. First, we have Dr. Jennifer Johnson Kebea, who is the Executive Director at the Lindy Center for Civic Engagement at Drexel University in Philadelphia. Next, we have Dr. Africa Hands, who is Assistant Professor at East Carolina University. Third, we have Dr. Linda Miles, who is Assistant Professor and Librarian at Hostos Community College at CUNY, City University of New York. And last, we have our very own Tim Siftar here at Drexel, who is Librarian for Education, Computing, and Informatics. And you can see I'm still admitting people here, so I have one eye on the admit list. This is very exciting. We have 50 guests. Very exciting. Thank you all for joining us. And before we hear from our speakers, we'd like to hear a tiny bit from you. If in the chat box, if you could tell us where you're from geographically and a little bit about your connection to the field of information services. Are you a student? Are you a professor, professional? Anybody else? Just hear a little bit about you. You can just type into the chat. This is also an unintended test to see if you're listening. Yay, recent Drexel grad, hello. Washington State, ooh, from Texas. Let's see, I see North Carolina, I see Colorado, Syracuse, Philadelphia, Maryland, Nebraska. Lots of students, it looks like, some librarians as well. Yay, just graduated from Maryland, congratulations. Students, yep. So it looks like we've got people from all over, particularly Philadelphia, North Carolina, Maryland, but all over the United States, new graduate students starting a new career and waiting to get a head start. And it looks like most of the participants are students. So welcome everybody, we're so happy to have you here. Again, my name is Denise Augusto. I am professor in College of Computing and Informatics. I forgot to say I'm also the director of our master's program in Library and Information Science. So first, we would like to hear from Jen, that's Dr. Kebea, again, Executive Director at the Lindy Center for Civic Engagement here in Philadelphia. Welcome.
Thank you, and thanks so much, Denise, and thanks everyone for joining us on this, is it Tuesday afternoon. I think the last few months have been a little disorienting for everybody, but it's so great to see such a great group of folks from literally all over the country as I'm looking at the chat box, and we share a goal. You know, we're thinking about how to really get engaged in work that is meaningful, and for many folks right now, that can certainly, you know, be an interesting pursuit, given the state of our economy and thinking about how to get proximate to some of these organizations that we care so much about and how really to develop contacts and leads and experience that will really make you step ahead. So I love the concept of really thinking about mobilizing volunteer opportunities as a form of experiential learning, which at Drexel we are big on, you know, really getting students proximate to learning opportunities that marry what they're studying in the classroom and the realities of really what's happening in the world and the workplace. And we certainly view volunteerism, or even the term that we use as an umbrella term at Drexel, civic engagement, as a core form of experiential learning. There's lots of ways that you can get proximate in this space. I just want to give you some examples, knowing that my audience is from throughout really the US. I don't think I saw anyone international on the line, but these examples that I'm most familiar with are really within the Philadelphia context, but cities have an interesting way of operating in similar fashions. So I think you may find some of these examples applicable to where you are. And so I'm going to share my screen and just share one slide that's in a deck that I have here. Just bear with me for one moment. And we can talk through some of these examples. Okay, so I see the green box around my shared screen. I'm assuming everybody can see it. Okay, wonderful. Okay, here are a few examples, and I certainly will entertain questions at the end of this whole presentation about particular cases or examples that you might want to play out. But something that I've found helpful when people are coming in thinking about how do I get involved in my city? How do I start to understand the organizations that are present and doing great work that I really am passionate about? Many cities over the last few years have taken to organizing these types of examples and opportunities in citywide community volunteering databases. Philadelphia has a great example of this. Serve Philadelphia comes out of our mayor's office of civic engagement, and it really does encourage nonprofits and government organizations to reach out and say, this is the need that we have. We're looking for people with these kinds of skills. And it can be a great clearinghouse if you're looking for somewhere to start and somewhere to start thinking about how do I access some of these resources. Another example of a way that you might find an organization that you're passionate about connecting with are through some of the large convening organizations that exist within cities and urban centers and throughout counties and states. One example would be United Way. Many nonprofits roll up into an umbrella organization like United Way. So if you were to reach out to them and say, this is something that I'm interested in, or go on their website, you may be able to access a list of their member organizations and start to narrow your search a bit more further. Another great resource is your current school or your alma mater where you've graduated from. Many of higher ed institutions have offices just like the office I come from at Drexel, the Lindy Center for Civic Engagement. We exist to connect our students, our faculty, our staff, our alumni to these types of engagement opportunities. So you certainly can reach out to that office on your campus, or if you're part of the Drexel community, reach out to me in the Lindy Center, and we can think about really what resources we have to share. And that doesn't matter whether you're in Philadelphia or whether you're coming from a different city. We'll help you think about how to connect and really what ins we may have. We're part of national networks of other offices like ours in at other schools in other states and other cities. And we would be happy to help you network in that kind of capacity. And I would hope that if your alma mater has that capacity, they would extend that benefit to their alumni as well. Another organization within your alma mater that might be doing this work is your alumni organization. I've seen many that have chapters focused specifically on volunteering and getting people engaged in community. That might be an outlet too for you to think about how to connect. Beyond that, there's always the direct connection, right? You know, you have an idea of the type of organization where you want to volunteer with and gain experience, perhaps pursue a job opportunity in the future. I would say go for it. I think there's so many ways to connect, and you guys are really the connection experts in so many different ways. But some pieces of advice: be proactive, search early, and use your connections. I've been side story, but I took Facebook off my phone because I felt like it was a little, too much right now at this point in time, but I've been using LinkedIn a lot more. And LinkedIn has some great connectivity opportunities for you to kind of see what your colleagues are doing, who they're connected to, and how to reach out. That personal connection, I think, will always help you go a little bit further than the cold call. So these are just a couple tips of ways to think about getting proximate to organizations that really connect to issues that are important to you. I hope they're helpful. I'm going to put my contact information in the chat box. You can feel free to message me here, or we can talk offline too. And thank you for being here today.
Great, thank you so much, Jen. Wow, I had never heard of Serve Philadelphia. It never even occurred to me that municipalities and cities might have databases of volunteering operations. So I know I'm very excited to go look at it after the presentation. Yay, thank you. And next we have Dr. Hans.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Augusto, for having this webinar and for having me on here. I assume you can hear me okay. And thank you, Dr. Kebea, for kicking us off with the general overview of volunteering. That was a great way to start things and thinking about in your local community ways that you can volunteer and the different ways that you can lend your library and information skills to your local community. I think that's very important to keep in mind, just the broad ways that you can use the skills that you're learning in your library programs. I want to talk about ways that you can volunteer in library and information science professional organizations, and that's where I've spent most of my volunteer time in the field, first by joining the organizations and then spending some time getting oriented to the general structure and the culture of the organizations, and then diving into volunteering. And most of this work has been through the American Library Association, which is a behemoth of an organization with lots of roundtables and lots of divisions, but it is a great place where you can really narrow in on your interest and what it is that you want to do and the skills you want to build, or the expertise that you want to share with your colleagues. One place that I started was the New Members Roundtable, and I don't know if they still do this, but a few years ago, there was a guarantee that if you completed the volunteer form, you would be placed on a committee. So that was a really nice way to get involved. And I participated in the online discussion forum committee, and that was a committee that worked throughout the month, or throughout the year rather, to stimulate conversation with colleagues through the New Members Roundtable listserv. So that was a great place to learn from colleagues and to interact with colleagues in the field that way. And then I made what I call my organizational home with the Association for Library Service to Children, or ALSC. And I started as a member of various committees, volunteering as a member, and then moved on to chair or co-chair committees, and then on to becoming an elected board member. And in each of those opportunities, one thing that I learned in terms of volunteering is there are many ways that you want to possibly think about how you think through your volunteer opportunities. It may be based on your interests, and that you may be looking at whether you're volunteering with an organization based on the topic or the audience that it serves, or the particular user group. If it's a particular library or cultural organization, you might be volunteering to develop particular skills. So you might be wanting to build your communication skills, learn finance, governance, project management, or even grant reviewing, which is something that I did on one of the committees that I served on. You also might want to think about whether you want to be in the background on a committee and volunteer in the background, or if you want a more front-facing role as a volunteer. And now that we are in the pandemic, there are lots of different virtual opportunities that you might want to seek. But you also think about whether you want it to be, maybe it's a one-time project that you might want to work on. And these opportunities come in the way of awards committees or poster judging competitions, in terms of conferences have posters, research posters that conference attendees put together. And sometimes you can volunteer for a one-time opportunity to serve as a judge on a poster competition, or you can volunteer to read proposals for folks who want to present at conferences. So that's another way to think about ways that you might be able to volunteer in professional organizations. Another thing to keep in mind is that you can also volunteer at conferences. Conferences are always seeking volunteers. You can volunteer the day of the conference. You can volunteer to work in registration or in check-in, and those provide really great opportunities to socialize and to meet people in your field, and also nice opportunities for possibly meeting the speakers at the conferences, maybe the authors of books that you've read in your classrooms, because everyone has to come and check in at the conference. So I like working registration tables for that purpose, because it's a nice socializing opportunity. You can also volunteer to moderate a conference session, and that involves introducing the speakers and fielding the Q&A, or you can be the room attendant that helps people find their seats and tell people, you know, that the room is full and they can go to the overflow room. Lots of different ways to interact with people at conferences. Many times there's also an information booth, or if your city is hosting the conference, or if your chapter of a particular organization is hosting the conference, you can volunteer to serve on like the guest host committee and tell people what you love about your city and help them to get around the city. So those are, you can volunteer at the conference. Another way is to, if you have a particular skill, like maybe you're a great photographer, volunteer to share that opportunity with taking photos of different conference sessions and of the attendees, and making the slideshow for the conference attendees. And one thing that happens at the ALA conferences at midwinter and annual is ALSP puts out a call for conference bloggers. So if you're interested in library services to children, you can sign up to blog for the conference. And I believe it's, you know, how much you want to blog or how little you want to blog, but you would attend sessions and then write up a blog post and send it to the comms person who's in charge of that. So those are different ways that you can use your skills kind of based on what you're interested in, and make sure that what you're volunteering for fits your interest and your skills, whether it's skills that you want to develop or skills that you want to share with the organization that you're volunteering with. And like I said, there's definitely virtual opportunities available, off-site opportunities available. And because volunteering is it's a privilege. It takes time, it takes resources, and you're doing it without any remuneration. You don't get any money back for it. If you're lucky, you might get credit for it. So if you can, try and get course credit for it. See if there's a way that you can build it into the work that you may already be doing for your class. Because I do recognize that everyone can't afford to volunteer for whatever reason. So there may be opportunities where you can even barter in less formal settings, definitely, where you might be able to barter your skills for whatever service or a need that an organization has. So as Dr. Kebea said, there are ways to get creative to find an organization that has a particular need for what you're looking for.
Great, thank you so much. Great. Actually, I don't know if you remember, Africa, we first met through ALS several years ago. It's okay if you don't remember.
I don't. Wow.
It's a long time
ago.
I still remember you were sitting at a very round table and I went up to say hello. But it's nice to see you again here. It's a good point you have about course credit. I know in our master's program, we do give course credit for volunteering in the form of the capstone project. You actually get credit for 2 courses. So that might be something that's done in a lot of different programs. Talk to your advisor, talk to your professors. If it doesn't work as volunteering for course credit, it might work as an independent study. Very good idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's see. Next we have Dr. Linda Miles. Hello. No roundtable. We haven't met before. And she's assistant professor and librarian at Hostos Community College in CUNY. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Augusto, for having me. So volunteering has become a way of life for me, I would say. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I got into it. First, I want to relate a little bit of information that I gathered from some of my colleagues who have done some volunteering in public libraries. I have a couple of friends who went through this route. For one of my colleagues, this was an incredibly positive experience. She says it helped her understand library work a little bit better. She was transitioning from another career, so this immersion really gave her that advantage. From that public library position, the volunteer position, she was able to use that to get an internship in an academic library. It's a little more difficult, I think, to volunteer in academic libraries. That's been the experience of some of my colleagues who have did that when they were students. But she was able to move from the public library volunteer position into an academic library internship, and she feels this really gave her a leg up in getting her current position. One thing she wanted to do along was that at the beginning, you may find that your supervisor is giving you tasks that are not very challenging. Maybe they're a little worried that you're not quite qualified. But she found that once her supervisor got to know her, she was given more responsibility. Specifically, she was able to do some shifts on the reference desk that she was not previously allowed to do. And that gave her some great experience for the job market. And she said her supervisor was amazing, was willing to give her that chance, and was also willing to listen to her talk about some projects and some ideas for some kinds of work that her supervisor really hadn't thought of before. I have another friend who had a negative experience working in a public library, and I think it's important to talk a little bit sometimes about some of the pitfalls. For her, she found that it never got past that initial stage of being given very low skill responsibilities. So she didn't feel that she was growing very much in that position. And then she moved on from that position to something else. I wanted to mention another way to volunteer in the profession that just occurred to me as Dr. Hans was speaking, and that's to volunteer to produce book reviews for some of the journals. If you're on some of the listservs, you might see some calls for book reviewers go out. And that is a nice way to get your name out there, to flex your muscles a little bit in analyzing some new publication and providing a review. It's a great service to the profession. Most of my experience with volunteering has also come through professional organizations, professional associations. And in my case, it started out very local, very regional. So I had been working for 11 years in a special library, and I was laid off a few years after the 2008 financial crisis. And I had had some great experience in my past life with professional organizations when I was a theater history and criticism graduate student. And I had become the graduate student rep for a professional organization. And it was incredibly fulfilling. So when I found myself unexpectedly on the job market in 2011, do some work with professional associations is what came naturally to my mind. And I started with ACRL New York. ACRL is the Association of College and Research Libraries, and that's the national organization. But there are regional chapters across the country. And New York State, in fact, has 3 chapters. And ACRL New York, ACRL NY, is the Greater New York Metropolitan Chapter. And I started out by looking for a committee, just as Dr. Hans had suggested. I found that they ran a year-long symposium planning committee for their annual symposium. And that's how I got my foot in the door. And then I moved on to co-chairing a discussion group. They have topic-based discussion groups. Eventually, I was elected into office on their executive board, served as vice president, president-elect, and then president. I still am co-chair of one of the discussion groups and still on their executive board. There's also the idea of consortia. In New York City and the region around New York City, we have a consortia called the Metropolitan New York Library Council, or Metro. And I volunteered to be an interest group co-convener. So instead of discussion groups, they had interest groups, and I got involved with that. But I really started with that organization as an attendee at some of their professional development events. So you begin to get a relationship with some of these organizations, particularly if they are local or regional to where you are physically. Finally, more recently, I got involved with CJCLS, which is the Community and Junior College Library section of ACRL. That is a national organization. And I was recruited by the nominating committee to run for recording secretary. So I've also been involved in their task forces and committees. And similar, since I got to the City University of New York, which is a university with 25 campuses in New York City, I've become involved in some of the task force and committees that cross that university. They also have a library association for CUNY librarians that I've been involved with. So there are a lot of ways to get involved. And a couple of the benefits I want to talk about specifically are that you will develop an amazing network of colleagues, both within the organization and beyond. One of the tasks that I volunteered to take on early on with ACRL New York was to take responsibility for posting notices to various listservs. And this is a way that I was able to raise my visibility even beyond the organization. So I have, with my colleagues from ACRL New York, I have been recruited to present on panels at conferences. And I also collaborated with one of those colleagues to write a book that was published last year. So it can really develop into very productive collegial relationships. And Dr. Hans talked a little bit about the roles you might take on in these positions. And I want to emphasize that as well. In addition to making connections with people, you're gaining experience and knowledge. So I learned a lot about how to manage a 30-member symposium planning committee. And eventually I was invited to present on how to run an effective committee and how to work collaboratively with a team. And that all came from the experience I gained volunteering for that organization. You can take on special projects. I did work on a project to set up a new budgeting procedure for the organization. That translates into very marketable skills. You also learn how to run a meeting and how to manage a nonprofit organization. It's incredibly valuable. A couple things to keep in mind when you're taking on a volunteer position. And the first is to treat that volunteer gig just like a real job. Take it seriously. Your duties take seriously promptness, communication, collegiality, and responsibilities. Remember that these are going to be your colleagues for life. Well, for the life of your career anyway. These are going to be the people who give you job references and who you will be giving them job references. You're going to talk about the work you do together to their potential employers. You're going to find future opportunities to work on projects together. These are important relationships and you need to cultivate them and nurture them. And in all cases, you present yourself as a professional. It has a little bit to do with confidence, I think. If you walk into the room discounting yourself as not being quite a professional yet, then that is going to impact the way that you work within that organization. But I think it's really important to present yourself as a professional. This is a professional internship. This is a professional volunteer opportunity. And you will be taken as a professional when you present yourself that way. And I would say don't just attend the meetings. Volunteer for tasks and then follow through on them. So if you take responsibility for doing something, make sure that you follow through. And it's as simple as that. Be clear about your expectations and ask your supervisor what they're expecting of you so that it's clear on both sides of the equation. A good supervisor will be ready to spend time and attention on nurturing. So I have set up a document with some links for finding opportunities to volunteer. I'm going to add that into the chat. So you'll see on here some links to ACRL's Chapters Council, which will help you find what ACRL chapters are near you geographically. ACRL, the national organization, they seek volunteers for their committee assignments approximately in February of each year. I've put in some links for the Special Libraries Association, the American Association of School Librarians, and I've also put in a link to a website that lists consortia across the country, and also a website that links professional associations, because there was no way I could produce an exhaustive list. I would also say that you may have an opportunity, you may be able to find an opportunity to volunteer for an activist organization in your area. When I was living in Seattle, a friend of mine who is a library, he's a cataloger in a library, we ended up volunteering for an activist organization organizing their archives. So those can also be wonderful opportunities. When you contact these organizations, find out what they do, check out their structure, and identify the opportunities. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Linda. That was really helpful. I really liked your point about taking a volunteer work as if it were professional work and taking it professionally. I think that's extremely important. Also, another thing really important you said are the benefits of volunteer work. And if I wrote them down right, you listed connections, experience, knowledge, and community contributions. I think the four excellent areas to think about the benefits of volunteering. Thank you so much. And before we get to our last speaker, I want to point out a couple of comments that have been posted in the chat. Jen said, if you are currently a student and qualify for federal work study, there is also a way to utilize that federal work study through community-based placement. It might be another way to access resources and make the choice about working versus serving a bit easier. Wow, I didn't know that. That's really something to look into, to think about community work as work study. Thank you. And then Africa wrote, organizations she mentioned, the New Members Roundtable of American Library Association, and then ALS, the Association for Library Service to Children, as well as the list of professional associations that Linda posted. So thank you so much. This is great. And last but not least, we have our very own here at Drexel, Tim Siftar, who's going to talk a little bit about some of what your education in the field and how it can help you in looking for volunteer opportunities. So take it away, Tim.
Thank you, Dr. Augusto, and thank you for everyone who's, we've all kind of added different lenses to this challenge here, and I'm grateful to have an opportunity to talk about this. I've been involved in the role of the advisor for the graduate student chapter of our umbrella organization here on campus that has represents the ALA, American Library Association, SAA, Society for American Archivists, and SLA, Special Libraries Association. And so in that role for, I don't know, a dozen years or so, I've helped students kind of brainstorm about how to, get in and get experience in their, while they're taking their degree and while they're in that launch kind of trajectory. So one thing I did in that capacity, let me share the screen here, if I may, is I challenged the president of our DULASA chapter to come up with 10 options to promote oneself with as you pitch to nonprofit organizations. 10 things you did in your degree that you think a nonprofit might find beneficial to have from a MSI is the name of our degree. Master of Science in Information student as far as navigating the fallout from COVID. So that was very specific because right now we are in a historical moment that everybody seems to like to use this word unprecedented, but really you'd have to go back 100 years to find anything like it. And so there are certain opportunities and certain restrictions as to how you go after these opportunities. I'm talking today. And so well, I'll just go down the list here for a couple of these. As it has been mentioned, it may be that there's a capstone project requirement that allows you to get credit while you're volunteering. That's an obvious one. Or an independent study. If you really have a niche that you want to pursue, maybe you're already working in a volunteer position, you want to get credit for it. That's an easy one to go after. DULASA is our local group, and just taking a role in that leadership role. Leadership is a funny thing to train in, and you don't really know what it is until you get a taste of it. So putting yourself in the path for that in a low stakes setting, like in a student association, is an excellent way to go about it. And I'm shamelessly plugging ours for anybody who's a Drexel student. But those are also key skills, like working with volunteers and recruiting people, key skills that would be relevant in a not-for-profit association. So these are skills he learned during his degree, not in a class, but in the student association that he feels he could market to a nonprofit. Dr. Gusto, maybe the LIS working group, it sounds like it's a faculty-student collaboration to develop curriculum, keep the curriculum current in the college, and that.
It's our name for our curriculum committee. This particular student was one of our student members of the curriculum committee, because we really want student input on the curriculum so we know what students think about what they're. Yeah.
So that right there, any nonprofit organization is going to have a message. Oops, I'm getting some music. I'll check if we're muted. Or Dr. Augusto, maybe you can mute the offending speaker. I'm not going to fight this one. Okay, thank you. Oh, anyway, so curriculum, and I'll say if you have an opportunity inside your organization, your degree granting organization, while you're a student, they also want alumni in those groups, and they are, in my experience, fairly open to hearing feedback from people who've just progressed through it on everything from like the textbook to the guest speakers to the format, and this kind of merges with the number 5 point. By now, you are all online learning specialists, and if you've taken a Blackboard class or a Zoom session like this, you may want to look at the flip side, like how, what did you like, what didn't work for you, what are more effective ways, and could you design something better using a free tool like Moodle, or facilitate the Zoom session in a more interactive, collaborative, exciting way. What kind of activities could you bring in to make it more engaging? So every not-for-profit right now is scrambling to do these things I've just described: online classes, training, onboarding volunteers and members, and facilitating engaging Zoom sessions. I even know my folk dance group is doing Zoom sessions, and boy, have they gotten creative. Web design, it's kind of an obvious one, but bump it up a notch or two. How many shoestring not-for-profits do you know out there that don't even have a website? Or could they bump it up from going from the the free Squarespace to the Wix or whatever? How can you guide them in what the next options are, and maybe do a bit of this, what you might call a software selection, as to, well, we want to have a credit card donation option on our webpage. I could tell you how long that decision took in our local ACRL chapter, to which credit card processor was, not going to charge too much fees, and was easy enough to work for everybody's credit card. these are real questions that every not-for-profit has. Information visualization. So you've probably gotten a taste of this. Maybe you've used Tableau or looked at Google Analytics for a website. Whatever free option you have out there. In Vivo is a new site license at Drexel. I know they have a free version too, but ask your nonprofit prospect, what kind of data do you have? Or put yourself in their shoes. What data are they likely to have that would help them make a decision? And I guess a general statement about all of these is in line with some of the first comments we heard. They're going to, a volunteer situation, they're going to want to see you kind of take increasing levels of responsibility. They're not going to give you their crown jewels to polish, the first day on the job. Maybe you can, what can you do from free public information to show them an exemplar of what you've done? And frankly, maybe you have something from your portfolio of student work that speaks to a specific need. Because another overarching statement across all of these is that, volunteer commitment can be looked at two ways. I'm gonna give this many hours to this organization, and you do with me what you want. Yes, you have to be professional and all that. I guess my background prior to coming into librarianship was in a bunch of consulting organizations. So I almost look at, the specific course projects that you've done as potential engagements, by which I mean, like you're doing a piece of work, a work for hire for a not-for-profit. Maybe they're not paying you, but you're seeing it, from start to finish, and giving that, a little bit of requirements analysis to make sure you got it right, a little bit of sales on the front end. This is what I could do for you, and then delivery of the final product, and maybe tweaking and training to hand it over to them in a way that they could maintain this. So this applies for the information visualization. Locate that. It's not a generic skill. Say, oh, I want to support your strategic planning. I want to look at your technology options by comparing software packages. I want to look at the coping strategies that your competitors have been doing, or your suppliers, or your clients. What are, everything's in flux, and there's a lot of information out there right now, that could help them, without drinking from a fire hose. The information visualization, again, gives you a high level summary. Number 8, the archival work. Every not-for-profit is challenged by, again, the other kind of fire hose, user-generated content, and all their marketing photos and all their blog posts. How do you capture that history? How do you have a strategy for it? In many of the archives classes, they teach that sort of thing, and you can come to them with, say, a scaled approach. Say, oh, well, here's the free Flickr option, here's the freemium option for $10 a month, and here's the professional. Do they even have the language to describe their needs? Maybe not, but it helps if you give them, price points associated with some kind of value proposition that you can articulate. Maybe they don't know how to grasp. Data collection and storage, that may be dependent upon the kind of organization you're into, but I'll tell you a story of a friend of mine who said, for it was an activist organization for all the people out there, doing campaigning on the street or promotion of the cause elsewhere. There's certain jobs nobody wants to do. So I'll do that job. I'll do the data entry in the CRM, the membership database, customer relationship management database. I'll learn the free version of Salesforce. Did you know that not-for-profits, if they're 501c3, can get a free account on Salesforce? Well, guess what? You are looking at the same kind of, data security, data integrity, and issues that you would in an archive, but over there in that kind of content management, enterprise content management context. So that's my spiel on that. And then design thinking. You've probably touched on that in your at some point in your degree experience. That is widely applicable. Pick a fun area like signage, or how the organization presents itself publicly, and play with it. Invite people to a low stakes brainstorming session following these principles, and see how far you get. Again, if you pose it as a low stakes option, maybe they're too busy, but maybe some of their leading volunteers would help you kind of build a proposal in that area. So again, you've done many things that would qualify as a professional deliverable, and I've met consultants who do personal information management. I've met consultants who do software selection or just information visualization. Maybe they need that strategic plan refreshed every year. What else was I going to share here? I was just going to, and maybe there's a slide deck out there that talks about, software selection and nonprofit market research and competitor intelligence, or nonprofit strategic planning, something to give your potential client a sense of where you'd go with that. So I wanted to say that, again, this is kind of a different approach to volunteering. You have a project. It's a project-based offer, and to solve a specific need, and causes have been mentioned, or political candidates, activist organizations have been mentioned. Those are places where the need is high and the structure is low. So if you can kind of carve out what a specific offer would consist of, you're likely to find a ready taker. I did another kind of long list of reading lists and indexing projects, or anyway, you can kind of keep. I would challenge you to come up with 10 things like my student did here with the with his brain dump from his experience. But what are the techniques you read about that are applicable in any organization, and can you do a one-off version, a baby steps version with a sympathetic audience? That would be a different approach to this volunteering thing. So oops, let me stop share. And that may be kind of it, but I know that just facilitating a meeting like this is challenging. Some organizations have never heard of Instagram, or they need a generational translator to tell them what TikTok is. They don't know about the new technology, and really, how can it help them solve a problem right now? Everybody's in crisis, and I think we have a lot to offer. So pick a place to begin, and especially if you have a subject matter expertise that you're leveraging, that's what I'd push on.
I want to go back to something that Tim said about creating portfolios or that sort of thing for a potential client, and that there are many students here on the call right now. I encourage you to think about building a prospective portfolio as you go through your program, and thinking beyond the assignments and the potential grade and what the instructor might want, and thinking about how you can create or use that assignment as a potential portfolio artifact, what presentation you might put together for a particular assignment, how that might be a selling point, how that might be a marketing tool for yourself for either a job or a volunteer opportunity. So kind of thinking beyond what are the specific requirements that might get you a certain grade or something, but thinking, you know, how could this particular assignment launch you into something else that you might be able to do with that in terms of volunteering or in your work setting.
Great, thank you so much, Tim, and thank you to your student. It's hugely important advice if you're going to approach an organization. Before you just coldly go and approach that organization, have an idea in your mind, preferably written out as Tim showed us, of what your strengths are, what your skills are, and what you can contribute to that organization. Look online, find the organization's mission statement, find their areas of focus, and see where you fit in.
Yeah, and I'll just mention on the downside of volunteering, I guess, you know, one time I went to be a volunteer cataloger. It's a long time ago. And, you know, for me, there was a librarian in the organization. I thought they knew what cataloging was. I show up and I'm doing that. And then the call comes out, oh, we need people to stuff envelopes. And I said, well, really, I'm just here 4 hours a week. And I'm here to catalog. No, I'm not stuffing your envelopes. You know, that's not what my role is. And so you have to, you do have to kind of defend your space in some contexts, because, you know, as much as you are the sum of all your skills, you're bigger than that too. And you're known for this professional disposition. That's kind of why, you know, they say don't look, you know, your library school education is more about what you do on the last day of your career than the first day. Mm. You know, you want this education to serve you a long career, and maybe some days it involves licking envelopes, but mostly if you're just going to be there 4 days a week, you want to be sure you're making your difference in the area that you know that serves you and the organization in a way that you've agreed to. So anyway.
Great, thank you so much, everybody. So do you guys have questions? If so, if you please read them in the chat so that we can answer questions. Write them in the chat, that is. While we're waiting to see if questions in, does anybody on the panel, do you have additional comments or ideas?
I just wanted to mention that the way that I found my way into ACRL New York, which was their symposium planning committee, I was on the job market, but I was not a recent graduate. I was not a student at the time. But there were students who volunteered on that particular committee and volunteered for specific tasks related to the symposium, followed through on those responsibilities, and they are still in my regularly contacted professional network. We're still in touch, we're still working together, we're still seeing each other. So I do believe one of them I did write a job recommendation letter for, based on the experience we had together on that committee.
Wow, that's fantastic. All right, I don't see any questions coming in.
Here, one more along those lines. Okay. Like the way I frame the opportunity for the students in the student chapter is, you know, again, you're stepping into leadership, and you can take the professional chapter kind of in the direction of your personal interests. You can guide it somewhat. So that's one point, but also to follow on the point that was just made, I tell students that, you know, being involved in the local chapter, your professional organization, it's not like the people sitting around the table are going to hire you today, you know, as after meeting you the first time. But guess what? In 6 months, when they say, oh, I need to hire somebody and I need it quick, who are they going to think of? They're going to do a mental checklist of the people that were sitting around them and say, oh, this one could probably use, you know, this position, and you will be there already. So it's not just a foot in the door. You're you're the face, you know, that comes into their head when they think of that need they have. So that's really the investment you're making. Yeah.
Okay, great. Any other questions before we sign off? Thank you so much to the panel. I know I learned a lot. This was hugely helpful.
I do see a question there
Oh.
related to looking for online volunteer opportunities in relation to the pandemic. I could only speak from my own experience. The symposium that we normally conduct in person in December has been converted into a virtual symposium for ACRL New York. We're actually hoping to get a much broader audience because people will be able to participate virtually in a way they haven't before. But our planning meetings are also virtual. So I think you'll find that organizations that are continuing to do the same programming but have transferred that into virtual events will still be needing the volunteer help.
And I'll mention that, you know, most of the things I talked about, the information visualization, you know, collection development, coming up with reading lists, strategic planning, all that stuff is a virtual kind of proposition. And entering data into Salesforce, you know, maybe it would behoove you to even, you know, look within your circle of what organizations you're affiliated now and say, oh, you know, maybe we don't need it. Maybe Salesforce is an overkill, but can you sponsor me getting this free account so I can play with it and experiment with it, see if it works for us, and, you know, do a personal exploration. You know, it would be something meaningful to me as a member of my church to see, you know, our membership directory online, and it would be a skill building opportunity. So you can kind of pitch it a bunch of different ways to get the experience, to have something in your portfolio that then you can show these online or these organizations in an online setting that you can add value to their organization. So yeah, lots of online opportunities.
I was just thinking, if you are involved in an organization or know of an organization that's just getting started with moving their meetings online or doing conferences and things like that online, maybe they need help with that, or need help with moderating a chat or doing technical support with the attendees of the panels or the meetings, or even if it's your church, they may need some back end support there. So if you have some technical skills or you've been using Zoom since March, you might be an expert in it. So there may be some ways that you can parlay those skills that way too, to volunteer opportunities. And Denise, it looks like someone's asking for a link to the previous webinars.
Yep. If you guys keep talking for a minute, I can put them in the chat. I just have to quickly look them up. Let's see.
There are, one thing a friend of mine does is put together, she reviews graphic novels in very narrowly themed areas, you know, so graphic novels for youth who have this kind of issue, or seniors who have that kind of issue, health issues, etc. And just curating a list, if one doesn't already exist, like what's the website, graphicmedicine.org. Did you know that there were hundreds of graphic novels about medical conditions? You know, that right there is, I haven't seen it written up lately, but bibliotherapy is an area. If you know people struggling to adapt to a new health condition or a legal situation or something, there's a graphic novel for that. And you can become like that's a way to combine like a fun thing and a community service in the same way. And I've had a lot of fun collaborating with her on building lists for different issues. How's that for a filler, Denise? And she also, now she is a pro. She serves on the review committees for the association's awards. So she reads lots of graphic novels, but you can do it too and make recommendations for the organizations you're in. Yeah. Okay, so we got our YouTube previous sessions here. Great.
Okay, I found them. Let's see, the first session, the guests were from the Free Library of Philadelphia and then the City of Philadelphia. And the second session, our guest speakers were were the State Librarian of Delaware, Academic Librarian in Pennsylvania, and then an archivist. So thank you everybody so much. We so much appreciate your time. We are a couple minutes over though. So if you have questions, anybody, feel free to contact me, and thank you everybody for your time. And it's good to see everybody. Hang in there. And
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for organizing.
it was Tim's idea, so thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
All right, bye-bye everybody.
Bye.